Welcome to the All Facts Matter podcast, where we push back against corporate media propaganda with facts, evidence, and data. I'm Peter, the author of All Facts Matter. Let's begin.
Yesterday's biggest non-news event on Wall Street was Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell doing exactly what people expected of him. Not a damn thing. Specifically, Jay Powell and the Federal Open Market Committee opted not to lower the federal funds rate at the conclusion of their regular two-day meeting. This was exactly what Wall Street has been expecting for some time. That Jay Powell did what Wall Street expected of him is not newsworthy. What warrants further consideration is that Powell did nothing on the federal funds rate because he does not know what to do. Remarkably, Jay Powell all but admitted he did not have a good read on the economy, and Wall Street was okay with that. Jay Powell's indecisiveness is as good a reason as any to unpack some of the economic data which mystifies him. By applying a soupcon of analysis, perhaps we can see what Powell might be overlooking and get the read on the U.S. economy that appears to elude him. As I had noted yesterday, the clear expectation on Wall Street was that the Federal Open Market Committee was going to let interest rates stand for at least another month. When the FOMC made their public announcement yesterday afternoon, that is exactly what they chose to do, keeping the federal funds rate at 4.25% to 4.5%. In his usual post-meeting press briefing, Powell sought to explain in his opening remarks that the Fed's uncertainty about Trump administration's tariff policies was the principal driving force behind the committee's decision to stand pat on the federal funds rate. Yet while Powell and the FOMC are stymied by the unorthodox policies of the Trump administration, Wall Street has for quite some time been dialing back the expectations of imminent recession. We know this because not only have a number of Wall Street experts, such as Ed Yardeni, been reducing their recession forecasts, but last fall, the yield curve on U.S. Treasuries finally came out of inversion. For the past couple years, the shorter-term maturities have commanded higher yields than the longer-term maturities, a phenomenon long viewed as a recession warning signal, as it indicates that markets are taking a dimmer view of the shorter-term outlook than the longer-term outlook. And that inversion ended last October. Now, President Trump's disruptive policies have not altered the yield curve outlook. On that basis alone, we have to take recession fears with a fairly large grain of salt. Wall Street is simply not channeling that sort of pessimism at the moment. We received further confirmation of Powell's confusion immediately after his opening remarks, when he fielded the very first question. Now, uncertainty would prove to be the dominant theme of the press briefing, even when Powell was asked why the Fed insisted on waiting still longer before making further reductions to the federal funds rate. Despite the Fed seeing elevated risks to employment, Powell believes it is better to stand and do nothing instead of attempting to be proactive. Powell's passivity reminds me of the Fed's inaction in 2021 and 2022, when transitory inflation was allowed to take hold in the U.S. economy. Standing by and doing nothing has not always worked out well for the Fed or for the U.S. economy. Whatever the reason for Powell's inaction on interest rates, Wall Street was apparently satisfied that he met their expectations. Despite dropping sharply when the FOMC press release first came out, during Powell's presser, Wall Street largely recovered to finish the day in positive territory. In foreign exchange markets, the dollar rose against the dollar index throughout the press briefing. And not only did the dollar gain, but its gain was more rapid during the press briefing than it had been in the run-up to the FOMC press release. and even Treasury yields rewarded Powell by moving lower on the day. Given Powell's predilection for saying things to spook the markets, he received a surprising vote of confidence yesterday afternoon. But if Wall Street is content with the status quo, Main Street, where the actual factories exist and where the actual jobs exist, is rather less optimistic about where the economy is headed. The Institute for Supply Management Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index printed contraction for April at 48.7, the second month of contraction in a row. The S&P Global PMI was only slightly better, narrowly avoiding contraction with a 50.2 print. The S&P Global Services PMI has likewise been softening in recent months. While it has been printing expansion, that expansion has been softening. And even the ISM's Services PMI has been showing signs of weakness in recent months. While the S&P Global and ISM PMI data are apparently not on the Fed's radar, they are still economic data points that Wall Street uses regularly to assess the ongoing state of the economy. And the S&P Global and ISM PMI data tell us that the U.S. economy is not altogether healthy and robust. Moreover, the economy has been getting somewhat worse over the past several months at least. Nor is it simply the PMI data which is signaling that all is not well in the U.S. economy. The diffusion index from the Texas Manufacturing Outlook Survey printed an alarming negative 35.8 in April. To say that manufacturing businesses in Texas have a negative perception of their business environment would be an understatement. And the outlook is not much better in New York. With the Philadelphia Federal Reserve's Manufacturing Business Outlook Survey finding a business sentiment almost as negative as that in Texas. When manufacturing businesses across the country share a negative outlook on business in general, it is difficult not to see that as a signal of gathering weakness within the manufacturing sectors of the economy overall. Regardless of the underlying cause for the negative sentiment, the end result is manufacturing businesses which do not have confidence in the future. That's a signal showing economic weakness that is difficult to ignore. And yet somehow Jay Powell managed to ignore it. Now, we should not conclude from the manufacturing surveys that all the data out there is negative. There are data points that signal economic strength. The rising dollar volume of manufacturing new orders is very much a welcome sign of manufacturing growth. And even more encouraging is when we drill down into the new order data, we see similar strength for durable goods new orders. And even consumer goods, which showed one of the weakness new order prints in April, at least remained constant on the month. Manufacturing may be sour on the future, but rising new orders are definitely a reason to be hopeful about the present. No matter how hopeful we may be from rising dollar volumes of new manufacturing orders, however, we should not overlook the reality of the ongoing jobs recession in this country. Manufacturing employment, which lost jobs in April, highlights the continued weakness evident in U.S. labor markets. A lack of manufacturing jobs is one reason the United States has seen rising unemployment since early 2023. And that lack of manufacturing jobs is equally a contributor to rising number of people who are forced to work part-time because they cannot find full-time employment. When Powell speaks of a solid labor market in this country, it is clear he is ignoring much of the available detail on the labor market. Even the April employment situation summary, notionally a strong jobs report, showed that the U.S. is still not producing enough jobs given the size of the labor force. The data shows the U.S. economy is producing jobs. The data shows the U.S. economy is not producing enough jobs. Jerome Powell chooses to ignore that data. Contrary to how Jay Powell presents the U.S. economy, we have a wealth of data detailing numerous weaknesses within the economy. We have PMI data indicating major sectors of the economy are in contraction. We have survey data showing manufacturing businesses across the country are extremely pessimistic about the future. We have shrinking employment. These are all signs the economy is not in a solid position. The economy is not in a state of catastrophic collapse, but neither is it in a state of even rude health. That much is apparent even from just a few data points I have presented here. Why Powell prefers to toss out nostrums about labor markets being solid and the economy being in a solid position in the face of considerable data which shows the exact opposite to be true is a mystery. Why he prefers to then contradict himself by rambling about elevated risks which would not exist in a healthy economy by definition, is also mysterious. Equally curious, and more disturbing, is Powell's inability to state clearly why the FOMC felt that not lowering the federal funds rate was the right policy choice given the current data. While the logic of tweaking the economy by manipulating the federal funds rate is dubious at best, within that policy, the clear evidence of increasing economic weakness argues for action rather than inaction. A 25 basis point reduction in the federal funds rate might not produce an abundance of economic stimulus, but it certainly would also not produce an excess of consumer price inflation. A 25 basis point reduction would have been a prudent and proactive choice by the Fed. It would have been the right choice by the Fed. Even Powell's elevated risks assertions would be better deployed defending a rate cut rather than a decision not to cut rates. Now, there is no logic to denying or minimizing the very real problems that have existed in the U.S. economy for quite some time. We have been in a jobs recession since November of 2023, and quite possibly earlier. Manufacturing especially has not been doing well in this country. We have economic sectors that are contracting rather than expanding. Despite the data, Powell preferred to stand by and do nothing. Instead of looking at the economy unsparingly and realistically, Powell preferred to ignore crucial evidence and dissemble. Instead of defending in clear and coherent terms why the FOMC did not raise interest rates, Powell preferred to advance a confused and internally incoherent fairy tale about economic health and vitality. Despite the data, Wall Street was pleased with Powell's preferences. Looking at the data, we should not be pleased. Not with Jerome Powell, and not with Wall Street.
And that concludes this presentation. I hope you found this podcast helpful and informative. Please like it and share this with your friends. Word of mouth is how I publicize my work. Please also consider making a one-time donation or becoming a paid subscriber to All Facts Matter. Your support is what keeps this work going, and I greatly appreciate all of my subscribers. Without you, this work would have no meaning. I encourage everyone to be especially generous with feedback. Leave a word or two in the comments section so that we can keep the discussion going and that we may learn from each other. Thank you all for listening, and have a nice day.